No, you're all okay. All right. If any residents would like to come up and speak to the board prior to the meeting, please sign up, come on up, and each resident is given 3 minutes to speak. Do we have anybody that wants to speak? Okay, let's do the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Right, we're going to call this meeting to order. And first thing we're going to do is establish the forum. Andrew Emmerich. Present. Dave O'Donnell. Here. Dave Lack. Here. Ted Reinhardt. Present. John Elkins. Here. Rob Rochelle. Here. Bill Simonelli is present. And we're also Chuck Field, General Manager. Here. Okay, we have a quorum. Okay. We have 2 items of business on the agenda for tonight. The first one is a resolution to approve settlement of the associated agreement, Section 10, placement fee for $45,000. I will read the resolution and look for a second. Whereas the association will be terminating the management services of Associate Gulf Coast, known as Associa, as of November 30th, 2024. Whereas the agreement between the association and Associate Gulf Coast includes a provision for the payment of a replacement fee from Section 10 of the agreement to compensate Associa if any existing Associa employees are carried over and employed by a successor management company. Be it resolved, the Association Board of Directors authorizes execution of the attached general release agreement, which stipulates that the association fulfill its Section 10 placement fee obligations for the negotiated amount of $45,000 and 0 cents. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to make some comments on that first. The placement fees are a common clause that are in contracts between associations and management companies. In the case of this particular one, the clause in the associate contract that was approved in 2021 required the association to pay 25% of the salary of the employees that would be carried over in the case of terminating associate services. Myself and the other members of the subgroup worked with Associa to convince them that that was a pretty ridiculous amount of money to be spending, to be paid. And over several weeks of negotiation, we got them to agree in writing, and both parties have agreed to this release agreement that they will, instead of trying to collect $136,000 from this association, they agreed to settle for $45,000 with no other obligations on the association's behalf. So with that, I'll open it up to any other board members that'd like to make a comment.
I have 2 questions for you, Bill. First question, is this $45,000 for every employee that Associate had on their books at the time of transition?
That is correct. They're all named in the release agreement.
There, all right. And will we have to pay a placement fee again in theory if we have to part ways with the new management company?
So in our contract with precedent, there is a much lower percentage that we agree to in the contract terms. And the second provision of that agreement is that we carved out all these existing employees. So if we choose to terminate precedent January, February of 2026, when the first opportunity we have to terminate their services, and the entire staff is still intact, we will be paying no placement fee to precedent to move on to another company.
All right, I'd like one clarity on the first question. Are we paying placement fees on on employees such as pool attendants and things of that nature, or are we paying fees just about on higher end salaries of the existing staff?
So their initial interpretation was the entire staff.
Okay.
We worked through negotiations and were able to convince them to reduce the amount based on essentially them agreeing which employees they were responsible for bringing on board, which employees were essentially brought on board by the on-site staff without much assistance from associates. So that's how we were able to settle on this $45,000 budget.
Understood.
Any other? Yes, Scott.
Yeah, my following comments are not directed towards any staff. I strongly oppose the fee being paid to associate or retain the current Sandoval staff during the transition to precedent. While this fee is stipulated in the associate contract, I believe this reflects a poor business decision that could have been avoided. This expenditure will cost each property owner a one-time fee of $31.58 to make the transition. The same penalty for staff separation is reportedly part of the new precedent contract, as Bill has highlighted, which really amazes me that these clauses basically create incentives for management companies for poor performance in cases of contract termination. Furthermore, the contract version of precedent exposes our community to additional risk by requiring us to provide full indemnification for their negligence, which is in section 12, the indemnification paragraph. Instead of paying this fee, the contract should have been allowed to expire, or we should have looked at a timeline, giving the staff the opportunity to apply for positions with precedence as they became available. Those are my comments.
Okay.
May I make a comment?
Yes, Ken.
If I understand the net amount is really 40,000, so we get a $5,000 credit.
We're getting a $3,000 credit from a precedent for the budget mailing. So
Which means that
really the net 42,000.
Which means that per door it's costing us about $29.
That's not
That's what
necessarily,
I'm speaking. It'll cost us about $29
that's not necessarily true because you have legal costs and burden as well.
per door. And that's about lunch for two these days. And so I think that it's certainly worth a lunch for two for me to keep our good staff.
It's $45,000,
It's $28 to me.
and the dollar amount does not include legal costs. It is a tremendous amount of money, and I give Bill a lot of credit for negotiating association off the ledge from 100,000, but it's
136,000.
yeah, 136,000, but to 45, but it's a lot of money, and I just think we should have looked at an alternative. Those are just my comments and opinions.
Thank you, Todd. One comment I'd like to add is that, assuming this is approved today, this will come out of 2024 operating budget, which is in surplus. So this will not have a negative impact to the budget, to this year's budget, nor will it have a negative impact in next year's budget. Do I have any other questions or comments from other board members?
Nope.
Should we call the question? All right. All those in favor of this resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye. Nay.
Nay.
Aye, nay, yay. I couldn't pick a number.
So this resolution carries 6-1. Thank you. Dave, as treasurer, has two resolutions to present to the board. Why don't we do the first one, Dave?
Pardon? Do the first one?
Do the first one.
All right. Resolution by the Sandoval Community Association, Inc. Whereas the Board of Directors has presented the attached proposed operating budget for the fiscal year 2025 to the members of the association. And whereas the proposed 2025 operating budget includes a community assessment of $2,380.00 per year to be paid quarterly in accordance with all association rules. Whereas the proposed 2025 operating budget includes a neighborhood landscape assessment of $1,524.89 per year to be paid quarterly in accordance with the all association rules. Be it resolved that the proposed operating budget for the year 2025 is hereby approved as presented by the Association Board of Directors.
Second. second by John. Okay. Dave, do you want to make some comments and then we'll open up to other board members?
The only thing I want to point out is that we are not increasing the community assessment for the operating budget. And those residents that live in the bulk landscaping area, they're actually getting a $92 a year discount or reduction. So I think it's a pretty good budget was put together for operating, and if there's any discussion from any other board members?
So I just have one question. So for the operating budget, were there any changes to the budget that is attached to this resolution from what was sent out to the community in the mailing several weeks ago? In
No,
the operating budget.
no,
So there's no change there.
correct.
Does any other member of the board have a question or comment? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of approving the resolution for the operating budget for 2025, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, David.
I'm up again. All right. This resolution is for the reserve assessment. A resolution by the Sandoval Community Association, Inc. Whereas the Board of Directors has presented the following proposed reserve spend budget for the fiscal 2025 year to the members of the association, which is governed by all applicable association rules with respect to the approval and the disbursement of association funds. And I'm just going to read off the amounts that we have budgeted for 2025. Emergency unplanned expenditures of $50,000. Reserve study-based expenditures of $579,463. Park benches, $5,555. Laptops for officer, manager, and compliance, $4,398. Addition of an AED for tennis and the pickleball courts is $2,500, and then discretionary reserve expenditures of $50,000 for a total reserve expenditure of $691,000 and $916. Whereas the proposed 2025 reserve spending budget includes a reserve assessment of $500 per year to be paid quarterly in accordance with all association rules. Be it resolved that the proposed reserve spend budget for the fiscal year 2025 is hereby approved as presented by the Association of Board of Directors.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, David. All right, David, would you like to make some comments on this before we open up for other comments from board members?
Yeah, I guess the thing I want to say is nobody wants to increase the reserve any more than is necessary. And I just feel that when you look at the reserve study that was just completed, the cost of maintaining the common areas has gone up considerably. It has gone up around 45% from 2022. And by increasing the reserve to $500, we will maintain $2 million at the lowest point. And I also feel that by raising it to $500 now will allow us to not have to look into raising it again for years to come. So those are my comments, and I'll open it up to anyone else.
I just would like to make a couple questions. So, David, so the proposal is just to increase the reserve assessment to $500 a year.
Correct.
There is no change in this resolution to the initial contribution, which is currently $4,000.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes.
That's right. So based on the feedback from the budget town hall and interacting with the board and with residents, that original proposal was changed to this current proposal.
Correct.
Okay. Yes, John.
I move that we amend the motion to have the assessment per door be $350.
Do I have a second to the amendment?
I'll second that.
Okay. Let's discuss that.
Can I tell you why? Okay. The reserve at $500 per door generates about $1.2 million in entry to reserve next year. That's including the 4,000 per door that we sell and the interest made from our assessment balance. A change to $350 a door still generates $950,000 next year, which is $300,000 more than the expected expenditure. So I think it's too much. It's too quick, too soon, and too much to increase that. I know those lines are there, but you do the lines in the first place. So I'm saying that if the line doesn't change now, it doesn't mean it can't change next year. So my proposal is we would make 350. That generates $950,000 in revenue, which is significantly higher than our reserve expenditure budget. And I hope that would be approved.
Do we have any other comments on John's amendment?
I'm opposed to increasing it only to $350 because the cost of everything has been jumped up so fast. And there's nothing to prevent it from happening again. This isn't something that I took lightly. It's not something that the finance committee took lightly. We struggled with this. And we finally said, we need to look at this long term. And that's why we came up with the $500 per quarter.
$500 per year.
I mean, per year, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, question, what do we presently pay per year for the property owner contribution to assessments?
It's $156.
So we're looking at a 233% increase in 2025 to fund reserves.
Correct.
Yes. The other thing is while I was looking at all this, I did some research and I found that the average monthly reserve assessment in Southwest Florida is anywhere between $60 and $150. By raising this to $500, we come in under $42 a month. So I would rather do this now, knowing that we're good long term, than turn around next year and come back and say, well, guess what? We miscalculated it, and now we have to raise it again.
Okay, let's say we do that next year. Okay, $1 for me now costs more than $1 a year from now because of inflation. We're only getting 4% on our money when we put it into our reserve account. If you need to raise it next year, raise it next year. But I don't think we should raise it more than 350. That once again, that generates about $960,000 against a budget of $680. So that's enough. Okay.
So I think what I'd like to say, John, is I want to go through you call it what we discussed in our email conversation over the weekend. Okay?
I saw it, Bill.
I think the objectives that the finance committee were trying to achieve there were two key objectives. One was projecting the cost of the reserve spend over the next 10 to 15 years. We did not want the reserve funds to go into a deficit. That's objective number one. Objective number two is to maintain an adequate surplus of $2 million to handle an emergency like another Hurricane Ian, so that we were able to get the community back in shape as we were able to do in the 22-23 timeframe, and take our time to plan out how we would potentially do an assessment for that, instead of having to put our hands out in the beginning of the repair cycle to get money to pay for everything. So I think what they were looking at was at what level of collecting reserve assessments over the next 10 years would keep those two key objectives. Now, I think you raised a point reasonably that maybe that goal of $2 million is too high. I would argue that we spent in Hurricane Ian $1.5 million that we had to put in our assessment that we needed, and the rest was covered by insurance. Okay. And a majority of the costs associated with Hurricane Ian repairs are not covered by insurance. The fence repairs, the cleanup of the debris that took well over a month of the common areas, the planting of new landscape, all those are not covered by insurance. So it's a question of how much safety do we want to have as a community. So that's why I've been in support of trying to keep it in that range. And when I looked at the, as I presented to the board, when I looked at a graduated approach, we still would fall short of achieving that $2 million balance and would probably be in the $1.8 million range. Now, if the economy goes great, house sales significantly improve, the cost of petroleum products go down, and so the road work 5 years down the road is less expensive than than is currently projected, then we're all going to be so good. But I think you can't plan on all those things happening and be in a position where you're trying to preserve the value of the community. We are a lifestyle community, not just a collection of homes. We have to keep our amenities up, we have to keep our roads up. That is what's going to improve and maintain the value of assets, our homes, in case we decide to sell them down the road or turn them into more equity we want to do for our personal choices. So that's why I believe that the approach that the finance committee is recommending is the approach to take.
Once again, my proposal allows $300,000 more to accumulate than our projected spending. So it will increase. And so I'd like to get the question answered. Do we approve of the amendment?
Well, let's see if there's any other board members wishing to talk first before we call a question on you.
Dave, I have a question on this whole topic, and that revolves around the variables in the model that can change it either positively or negatively for the number of years that we are looking out in the future. Inflation is one thing, costs changing is another thing. Return on investment income. Can we do a little look at? Can we do any work on playing with those modeling elements to see what impact? I see that looks like a stable line where it's all modeled out with the same assumptions going forward. I'm just asking a general question, what the committee looked at in terms of those kind of variables.
We based it mainly on what the 2024 reserve survey or reserve study said. For example, to correct the lake erosion, went from $44 a linear foot in 22 to $100 a linear foot in 24. The repaving of the streets, I don't have the exact number for that, but that increased 43%. Concrete increased 42%. So all of that was taken into consideration. If you look at what happened during the pandemic, prices shot up, and everybody said, "Oh, things will level off once the pandemic is over." I don't know about any of you, but I haven't seen anything really come down in price. And I've got to look at this long term and make sure that we do not put this community in a situation where we're turning around and saying, "Oh, guess what, everybody? You have to pay an additional $2,000 to cover whatever comes up." So that's why we came upon 500, and that's why we think in the best interest of the community, the smart thing to do is to approve $500.
So David, I'd say there's three key variables that affect the long-term projections. One is the number of houses that are sold, which I think if you look at the email that I sent out this week, I mean, it's increased that number from what the finance committee was to the number that John was suggesting that we would go, and then you've seen a 5% increase over from there on. The other thing that is constrains this model is the rate of inflation, which the reserve study suggested is 3% over the life of this study. And then the other thing that we're constrained about is the interest that we can earn on our reserve account. And we are constrained by our governing documents to only invest in funds that are backed by government securities, so that we're limited in terms of we can't go into CDs that aren't backed by the federal government, or we can't even go into municipal bonds that have higher rates or anything like that. So we're pretty well constrained at best view seeing 4% return on investment over the next several years. If we're seeing higher interest rates on bonds, then we're all in trouble as a country.
And let me
Yeah.
speak again too then, Bill. I'm not debating or questioning whether that number goes higher. I agree. I just say, don't do it now. We're already increasing at 350. We increased it by $300,000 in 1 year. We've never increased it that much. So at 350, we still get 300. If we needed them more in the future, let's do it in the future. Why do it now?
Well, I mean, here again, I think one of the life lessons that we all that a lot of us had to deal with is that it hurts to save now so that you are prepared for the future. That's true in our personal lives. I think that's true in many business enterprises. If you're not prudent in terms of your capital spend, you're setting yourself up for disaster. Now, Gabe, now do your questions answer about the model?
Yeah, I mean, the concern, I think that's a valid concern about the steepness of the increase is it's very rare for boards or budgets or corporations or entities to ever give money back. So in the event that we overshoot this projection and we end up, in the case where a 350 number or a 400 number puts us above that 2 million, then what? We reduce?
Yeah, we can reduce the reserve assessment. We're not trying to get as much money in as we can. We're trying to get money in so that looking long term, we're fiscally responsible with the community's money. And to build up the reserve to where it needs be, and then to turn around and analyze it the year, 2 years from now, I think makes more sense than hoping that we don't run into issues with 350 a year.
Yeah, I mean, and then from a process perspective, David, every year the board has to vote on the budget. So, so at a minimum, we will look at this again a year from now. And 2 years from now, we will have another reserve study that'll give us yet another view of what the future costs will be. And that'll probably be the most accurate view of our big time expenses, which will be roads and gutters and sidewalks, which is where we're backloaded costs are in the reserve fund.
I would anticipate that reserve study will demonstrate again significant inflationary pressures. So I think we're going to be chasing our tails in a sense.
In terms, I mean, if we
We're
don't,
going to be coming back to this table annually and saying we need to increase limits. That's what I'm saying. I think it's unrealistic to some aspect of the community to think that there wouldn't be a special assessment for some of the larger expenditures that are going to be required on top of the prepping them that they which I think 2 years ago when sitting on the finance committee, I advocated that we should begin to expect the community to contribute to the reserve fund. I think it was still. I understand why the developers did it, but I think it placed the community in a pretty bad spot, relying solely on initial contributions to fund the reserve study and allow them to keep the fees as low as they did. I also think it's completely irresponsible that the fee stayed so low for 18 years, totally ignoring inflation at all. So, just general comments. So I think we'll be taking our tails in 2 years on the next reserve study.
yeah, I think it's, I mean, I think in fairness, I mean, the future boards did a fairly decent job in terms of, getting enough funds in place so that we were able to get the hurricane in.
Agreed.
Without a negative impact on the community. But the cost profile going forward doesn't put us in that position unless we try to address that. Yep. So I'm going to call the question on the amendment to reduce the reserve assessment from 500 a year to 350 a year. All in favor of the amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
How many?
Four. All opposed? Alright, okay. So the resolution has been amended to change the reserve assessment from 500 to 350. Do we have any other discussion on the reserve resolution before we vote on it? Yes.
Just real quick, can you agree with both sides? What I'm saying is trying to make a joke. I've been saying this for years in regards to the reserves being underfunded. Home sales relying on that to fund our reserves has been a bad choice. Let's just face it. So I agree with what you're saying. I totally agree with what John is saying. We're putting the pedal to the metal too quick. We need to look at a systematic approach, use wise spending. And I questioned that at times. Okay. Reserve studies are very subjective. It's which way the wind blows. I can look at reserve studies from 5 years ago, 7 years ago. It depends who does the report and the information they're given. Okay. Totally agree. Inflation is going to drive a lot of that. How do we get there is the story we have to figure out. So I agree with what David's saying. Totally agree with what John's saying. That's my comment.
And I would be in that position as well. I think it's a staggered approach. I think we need to explore this topic again next year. They're already increasing it by 200 a year right now. We need to take it up another 150 next year. 200 at that point. If we put ourselves in the hole and need to make it up, let's do it at that point.
Okay, any other comments before we call the question?
That's it's just my opinion and the work and research that the finance committee did. That's what we fell upon was $500.
And I commend Dave on that because at the end of the day, the numbers are the numbers. We're going to have to face it. There's no question. And if the community doesn't think they're going to face it, please tell me how you're doing that because I know what my increases personally have been, but I can't imagine we're not going to see it from a community perspective due to inflation.
All right. Last comment, I'll just add to this. I don't think it's a disagreement about what we have to do. It's how big of a bite do we take initially. And so I've felt that I've been on both sides of this issue about the bigger increase and just thinking about it, we're gonna have to take multiple swings with the axe to solve this problem and having a shockwave of that big of an increase, I think what kept my thinking to the other side. Smaller piece.
Let's vote.
Okay, so I'm gonna call
We'll vote on
question on
motion.
resolution as amended, unless there's any other comments. Okay, all in favor of approving the resolution as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
How many opposed?
One opposed, David. Okay. Okay,
Appreciate that, Dave.
that is the conclusion of this agenda, and do I have a motion to
So move.
Second.
second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you too.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
We have any comments?
Oh, does any residents wish to make comments to the board before we leave? Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thing you get to do.
2477 Belleville. I just have one question. On the $45,000 payout, if these top people, compliance officer, Chuck, in 1 month decide to leave, do we get any money back?
No.
Okay.
No. That's a good question, but no. You didn't like.